Recording has been started. All right, so I have a new internet provider. So if you experience any kind of connection, any issues with the video or audio, please let me know. So far, everything looks good. All right, so let's do a quick recap on what we discussed in the previous class. We got started with triggers, right? And we are talking about the DML trigger, and we created a trigger. We created a DML trigger or after trigger, and we created one trigger, and then we also experimented with creating two triggers for the same event. And what is the anybody remember the execution order if you have more than one trigger for the same event?
Before they created,
The
like
order,
first they created.
right? The order in which those triggers been created. Great. And we talked about the inserted object and deleted object. And so inserted object always contains whichever record get inserted into that particular table, and deleted object contains the deleted record, as well as when a record get updated, the pre-update value is going to be in the inserted, sorry, the pre-update value is going to be in the deleted, and the post-update record is going to be in the inserted object. So if you are looking for, if you are doing an after update trigger, and if you want to find the old value and the new value, well, you can get the old value from the deleted object and the new value from the inserted object. The concept is going to be the same. Let me open a new query window here. Now, the next one I want to discuss is a function called as update function. Now, it's a common question. What is the difference between an update statement and an update function? And most of the students doesn't know there is an update function exists in SQL Server. So let's take a look at that one. So I'm going to create another trigger for that same example which we were talking about, which is my employee salary table. Okay. So this time I'm going to create an update trigger. My intention is that before I show you that, let me execute a select statement. Just want to show you what exactly on those tables. Okay, here is my tables, right? Here we go. Point to the right database. All right. So my intention, I want to create my requirement is that every time when a record get changed, or once the record is been inserted into the employee salary table, they cannot make any modification to the start date. That's what my requirement is. So once a record being inserted into the employee salary table, only column where you cannot make any changes through an update statement is the start date column. You can change the end date, you can change the salary, but once that's what the company policy is. Now, how do I make sure that there is not going to be any change in the start date? For example, if I'm trying to insert, performing an update statement, let's go with an update statement here. So update my employee salary, set start date equals, let's say 10/9/2016. Okay, where MPID equals 1. Okay, so when I execute this statement right now, if I execute it, definitely it will go through without any issues, and then this particular value get updated to 10/19/2016. But I want to prevent that kind of a scenario. I don't want, once a record has been inserted, you cannot modify the start date. You can modify the other columns. So if I want to implement that kind of a logic, do you think the validation will do that? The constraint will do that? Constraint validation? Constraint validation is not going to prevent any kind of a action in the update statement. So what you need to do is that you need to create a trigger. All right. So I'm going to create a trigger. So create trigger, and then I'm going to, the first two character indicates what kind of object it is, and it's an update. So I'm going to say U, and then the name of the trigger is going to be my employee's salary. Okay, on, followed by that table. Sorry, after which event, guys?
Table name.
No, no,
My employee.
no. Which event this trigger need to be fired?
Update.
Updates.
Update, right? The event is going to be update. Sorry, and then here I need to find the pre-update value and post-update value. So I'm going to declare two variables here. I'm going to post update, sorry, pre-update start date, and this is going to be a date column, and then similarly I have a post-update start date too. Right, now I want to get value for these two columns. So I need the post update and pre-update. The pre-update value is coming from which object? The pre-update value is coming from which object, guys?
My employees.
No, no, no.
Delete it.
Deleted object. The deleted object. So it's going to be start date. So here you go. You got the pre-update value. And then I'm going to do the post-update value from which
Insert.
inserted object. All right. So it is going to be post. And this object is going to be inserted. Right, so we have both objects ready here, or both values, pre-update and post-update, and the only thing we need to do is we need to do a if condition, right? If pre-update start date equals or not equal to post-update, then that's an issue. Then we need to raise the error and roll back, right? Is that we always do? If we have a error condition, we need to raise the error and roll back. So I'm just copy whatever we done in the previous class. Here we go. All right, and give a meaningful name here. Sorry, meaningful error message. So, all right, so I did that. So I'm going to create this trigger. All right, trigger has been created. Before we proceed further, let me go and save this file. See. All right, so now execute an update statement here. So same update statement we talked about. All right, save and new query window. All right, oh, there is a typo in my error message, but definitely it is my error message, right? So you can see that it is generating an error. Now, so my next question is, so definitely this trigger is firing, but my next question is select, let's do that select statement one more time. So this trigger definitely works. Now my question is that if I provide for the start date, if I provide the same value itself. So the value here is 1/1/2010, right? So let's go for that one. So if this is an update statement, but my post update value and pre-update value is going to be the same. Do you think this trigger, this is going to fire the trigger and prevent that change? Or my question is that if I give the pre-update, if the post-update value and the pre-update value is the same, do you think this trigger is going to recognize that and then let it go?
I think yes.
Daniel,
Yes.
what's the idea behind trigger? I don't understand.
Oh, okay. In last class we got started with trigger. The trigger is nothing but a block of code get executed whenever there's a particular event happens on a table. For example, there are two type of triggers: DML trigger and DDL trigger. The case of DML trigger means every time when an insert, update, or delete happens, and if you define a particular block of code for a particular insert statement or update statement or delete statement, that block of code get fired. For example, if I look at here, I wrote this block of code for which event? For an update. So every time when an update happens on my employee's salary table, this block of code get fired. Now inside that block of code, you can do whatever you want. Right now we are doing a validation. If you want to insert along with this update on my employee's salary, if you want to update another table, so you can do whatever you want inside that block of code. Now, most of the time, we will use the trigger to perform validation, which cannot be performed using our regular constraints. Okay?
Thank you.
Mhm. All right. All right. So in this case, now if you are checking whether the pre-update value and the post-update value is same using a trigger, well, then that will let you go because this value and this value is going to be the same. Now, the same trigger I'm going to implement. I'm going to implement the same trigger using a different way. So in this case, if I want to check whether there is a particular column is changed or not, you can use, instead of getting the pre-update value and post-update value and then do a comparison, instead of doing all these things, you can use an update function. Okay, so I'm going to introduce this update function here. All right. I don't want any of this. Do you have a question? Please mute a microphone if you don't have a question. Noise coming through. Thank you.
Daniel, can you please explain this a block of code? I'm not getting this part. We have just created the trigger, right?
Yeah,
Update
no, the block of
trigger.
code is nothing but whatever code you have inside the trigger. I mentioned this highlighted one is called as block of code.
Yes, but
Whatever the body of the trigger. That's what I said.
yes, but I'm not getting this code. How to write this?
Well, we are trying to, what is our requirement? My requirement is that if somebody try to make a change to an existing record on the my employee salary, question replacement of microphone. All right. So if somebody trying to make changes to an existing employee salary record, but my company policy is that they cannot make any changes to, or they cannot update the start date of the salary. So in my trigger, what I want is that I want to find whenever there's an update happens, I want to check whether there is a change in the start date. So in order to check whether there is a change in the start date, we need to get the pre-update value and post-update value, right? So that's the reason why I'm using these two select statement here. From these two select statement, I am getting the first select statement is giving me what was the start date value before the update, and the second select statement is giving me what is the new value for the start date. You can see that the old value I'm getting it from the deleted object, the new value I'm getting it from the inserted object. Are you with me so far?
Yes.
All right. And then
Yes.
I'm trying to do a comparison here. If the pre-update value and post-update value is not the same, that means the value changed, and I cannot allow that. So I'm going to roll back the transaction. So this is a convention way of checking whether a particular column is being updated or not. And if the pre-update value and post-update value, even if it's an update statement, and then if I provide the same value, then still that SQL engine the trigger is considered as the same value, the trigger is not going to do anything. So my requirement, so what I'm going to do next is, instead of checking the pre-update value and post-update value, how about using an update function? Okay. All right. So in order to check whether a particular column is changed or not, the simplest thing you can do is if update in bracket column name. All right. I'm going to alter this trigger. Okay. All right. Trigger. I will explain what this if the update function shortly. Let me show you this. So this trigger is been altered with the new block of code, which is very simple than the previous one you used here, right? Because I'm using the update function. Now, if I go back here, let's do a select statement first. I want to show you what is the existing value for the start date. For employee ID 1, the existing start date is this one. And then if you look at this update statement, well, I'm providing the old value as the new value itself. So if I execute this time it generated the error. Do you understand the difference? Even if in the case of my programming logic is this one, if my new value is same as the old value, this is not going to capture that because this condition is always going to be false, right? But if you use the update function inside the trigger, if you are using an update function to check whether the current value is been changed or not, well, even if you are providing in your update statement, even if you are providing the same value, still SQL engine consider this as an update. Do you understand the difference between those two? In the case
No.
of an
Yes.
update, even if you are providing the old value as the new value, this is the old value, right? If you look at the my employee salary table for employee ID 1, this is the old value, and I'm for the update statement I'm providing the old value as the new value. So literally speaking, there's no change in value, but SQL, if you're using an update function, even this case, even if the old value and the new value is the same, SQL engine consider it as an update function, or it's an update action. Now, how the SQL engine know that? Because if the SQL engine is checking the pre-update value and post-update value, definitely there's no change, right? But how the SQL engine know that the value is changed in this particular column, even if the pre-update and post-update values are the same? Any idea how SQL engine know that?
Maybe it doesn't. SQL knows that they are updating a start date. Anyways, whatever start date they are updating.
It's the default or whatever.
No. Well, what happened is that inside SQL Server, I mean, if you look at any table, because each one is called as a cell, right? When you are storing data in rows and columns, each of these values are called as a cell. Now in SQL, each cell is having a Boolean value, or it's like a true or false flag. Okay, each cell has that. Now each cell, the value of this cell is always going to be 0. The moment and inside a transaction, if a particular cell get updated, for example, if this particular cell get updated, that Boolean value is become true. The is updated flag is going to be true for that particular cell. Now that flag is not going to check whether the pre-update value or the post-update value is the same. The only thing is going to check is that, hey, am I subjected to an update? Doesn't matter what the new value or old value. Am I subject to an update? Well, I'm going to turn out the flag. So when I execute this select update statement, the is update flag for this particular cell will be turned on. Okay. Doesn't matter what the new value or old value is subjected to an update. So that flag is going to be turned on. And when you are using the update function is not going to check the values. Instead of that, it is only going to check that flag. So if the update function is checking the is updated flag of this particular cell, that is on, right? Because there is an update happen on that particular column. So this flag is on. So that's the reason why the update function is going to return a true value. Now there are two possible values for the update function, true or false. True means that particular column is been updated. False means that is not been updated. So when the update function checking whether that particular call that is updated is update flag of that particular cell, and if it turn out to be true, that means that there's an attempt to update the value in that particular cell. So that if the update function is going to be true, so the rollback transaction and raise error is going to be executed. So two different methodologies here. The update function is always going to check whether a particular cell is updated, and the way it is checking is that it is checking that is updated flag. Now, if you are using this method, we are not checking the flag, we are checking the pre-update and post-update value of that particular cell to decide whether that particular column value is been changed. Is it clear what is an update function? No, the row count is not going to work. The row count is only going to tell you whether a particular column has been updated. Now, sorry, what particular row has been updated. Now, in one update statement, you can update multiple columns, right? So if I say salary equals 100,000, well, this is a valid update, right? This is a valid update, but still I cannot afford this. So that particular update function is going to give me a true value. The row count is only going to give you the number of records being updated. All right, so on. Any question on this
Daniel,
update
one
function?
question here.
Yes.
Suppose we have a start date as a null, so there was no initial value, and we use that update function. Will that allow that change?
Yes. If you have an update, if your initial value is null, and when you update it, you change to a not null value, still it is considered as an update. Yes. So what happened is that, or the concept is that.
No, but it will allow us to change it, right?
Yeah.
When it is null.
Right.
Okay.
Absolutely. So the simplest thing is that if your column, that particular column is referred in your update statement, the flag is going to be on. Doesn't matter what the value is.
Daniel, in the case maybe you discover the date was entered wrongly, so do you have to disable this trigger to implement the change before you get back to it?
Well, what do you mean? Yes, you need to. Yes, if the date is wrong, I mean, if you have this trigger in place, you need to disable the trigger and then update the statement. Execute the update statement. Yes.
Okay.
So it's a common question: the update function and the update statement, which is the DDL statement, the DML statement. I'm sorry. So that's an update function. All right. So how about the DDL function, data definition language function? Well, data definition language function is very popular among DBAs. DDL. So let me do a quick recap here. So DML functions are also called as an after trigger. Oh, sorry, DML triggers are also called as an after trigger because it's always going to be, the trigger is always going to be fired after an insert or after update or after a delete operation, right? And there are three events: update, delete, and insert events. All right. So the DDL trigger is also called as for trigger. Okay, some people refer it as for trigger. So let's take a look. It's very simple. Hold on, let me open a file here. Where is my, okay, here you go. So my requirement is that, as a DBA, my requirement is that if somebody tried to create a brand new table on my production database, I want to prevent that from happening. And now if it is a most of the case, I mean, most of the time students will ask me a question immediately, hey, that can be prevented by configuring the security of those users. For example, you are a SQL developer or a report developer, and your privilege is to read data. If you try to create a table, well, as per your privilege, I mean, as per your login, you don't have any privilege for creating a table. There itself, you are going to get an error. Now, that is fine. I mean, that is how we normally configure your security. Now, how about people like me, or people with which who is having, you know, complete privilege on a database? For example, my intention is that I want to create a table on my development environment, but it is very likely that I will be running that creates table statement against my production. That's a careless mistake from my end. Now, when database look at my create table statement, hey, that is fine because I have the privilege to create a table on that particular database because I am having the system admin. So the SQL engine will not complain. SQL engine will create that table for me. So my requirement is that even if I have the privilege, I want to generate an error of every time when a user doesn't matter whether that user is having privilege or not, every time I want to generate an error when somebody try to create a table. Hari, yes, your answer is right. I will. Hari is asking when you are issuing an update statement, then the update function is always going to be true. Yes, for update function, it's going to be true for that particular cell. If you are referring to if your column, if a particular column is referred in the set, well, that particular column's update, the is updated true flag is always going to be true. Okay. All right. All right. So if you want to prevent somebody creating a table on a particular database, what you can do is that you can create a trigger for that. So if you are trying to create a trigger, if you want to execute, now what is a DDL trigger? DDL trigger concept is the same. DDL trigger is a block of code get executed whenever there is a particular DDL event happens on a table. Okay, on a table or a view. It is not limited to table because the DML is always limited to a particular table, but DDL, it can be for any kind of object. DDL trigger can be created for a table or a view or a stored procedure, function. Any of these objects, you can create a DDL trigger. So let's take an example here. So I'm going to create a DDL trigger for a table now. So my intention is that I want to prevent a table creation operation. So create trigger. Name of the trigger, I'm going to say tr underscore all right. So I'm going to create this now. The DML trigger is always created under a particular table, right? A DML trigger always going to be created under a particular table. If you look at the syntax, you have seen that along with the definition of the table, the trigger, you will say under which table that particular DML trigger get created. Now, in the case of a DML trigger, in the case of a DDL trigger is not associated to a particular table. You can create DDL trigger in two different levels. You can create it as part of a database, or you can create it as part of an instance. So right now, we are going to create a DDL trigger at the database level, and the next step is how we will see how you can create a DDL trigger at the instance level as well. So if I want to create a DDL trigger at the database level, you can say on database. So under whichever database, whichever database this particular statement is pointing to, under that particular database, this DDL trigger is going to be created. So this is just the name of the trigger, and it is going to be in this particular database. Now, for which event this DDL trigger need to be fired, that is going to be for create underscore table. I hope now you understand why it is called as for trigger, right? In the case of DML trigger, we use an after here. So that's why we always call it as after trigger as well. But in the case of DDL trigger, it is going to be for create table. So every time when a create table event happens on this particular database, the following block of code get fired. Okay. All right. Now I mean, the only thing I want to do is that I want to generate an error, roll back the transaction, right? So roll back transaction, and then raise error. You cannot create table on AdventureWorks database, right? Severity 16, state 1. All right. So this is an example for DDL trigger. So every time when somebody try to create and somebody execute a create table statement, this block of code get executed, and it is going to prevent that from happening. Now, what are the three events for DML? Insert, update, and delete. But in the case of DDL, this is one of the event. Similarly, for each object, you can have three events like this. The first one is create. Create underscore table. Second one is alter underscore table. Third one is drop underscore table. So if for each object, there is going to be three events, three variants of DDL trigger. Even for, an example is for a table, you have three DDL events. One is create underscore table. Second one is alter underscore table. Third one is drop underscore table. So the big difference is, apart from the way this block of code get executed, the DDL trigger is having so many different events comparing to DML, which is having only three events, which is insert, update, and delete. Yes, I believe somebody was trying to ask a question. Please go ahead. Life is good? Okay. So let me go and create this trigger for AdventureWorks database. All right, this trigger executed successfully. Now, before I do anything, let's see where I can see this trigger, because in the previous cases, we created the DML trigger, and that is under a particular table. The DDL trigger, if you go to a particular table, in our case, the table which we are using, this one, so expand the triggers, you can see the various triggers I created there, right? Three different triggers. But if you create a DDL trigger, the DDL trigger is going to be listed under, go to that particular database, and where is it?
System database.
No, not system. Data, you go under the programmability. No, not system database. It's a user-defined object, so it cannot be in the system database. So you go to that database, expand the programmability. You can see a folder called as database triggers, right? So expand the database trigger, and what is the name of the? Okay, this is the one, right? Yes, tr underscore ddl create table. So this is a trigger got created. Okay, so under that particular database. Now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a table for AdventureWorks database. We have something in the chat window. Let me check. Can we use DDL trigger for create, drop, and alter? Yes, because those are the create, drop, and alter are the three DML events, right? Not DML, I'm sorry, DDL events. So for each object, there is going to be its own version of create, drop, and alter. Kushbu, I hope I answered your question. All right, so I'm going to create a very simple table here. I'm going to call it as my test table. All right, open it, and then I'm going to call it as salesperson name, worker of 20. Well, the structure of the CHAR. All right. The structure of the column in the table doesn't matter here. I just want to create a table. Just want to make sure that the SQL engine will yell at me, or at least the trigger will yell at me. So here we go. right, mistake, table,
Create table.
create table. All right, here we go. All right, so it's very clear that the trigger get fired, and it is, even if I have the privilege to create a table on Adventure Work database, well, the trigger is going to act as a stopper. Okay. Now, if I have so many different yes, do you have a question? Okay. All right. So if you have so many different table, yes, please go ahead with your.
Now, if the person has all the privilege, can it just go, if they really want to do something, they could just go through that procedure just now, how you, unless, okay, maybe they don't know the name of the trigger, so that might be difficult, but they could just go into your system and delete the trigger from there.
No, I mean, this is primarily if you're talking about a person who doesn't have the privilege to create a table, well, and then he execute this create statement, it will not even reach at the trigger level. Straight away SQL engine say, hey, you don't have the privilege to create a table. Now talking about the second level, where a person has privilege to create, like people like you and me working as DBA, and you want to, I mean, you have the privilege to create the table, but you don't want that happen carelessly. You don't want to create a table on your Adventure Work database. So in that scenario, that's the scenario where most of the time we will use DDL trigger. It's not about your privilege. I mean, sometimes too much privilege is a headache, right? So you want to prevent some careless mistakes from your end. So that's the reason why we create this, because like that. I mean, if it is intentional, if you really want to create a table, I mean, I can certainly go and disable and then create the trigger. Sorry, create the table. But that is not the whole point here. The DDL trigger is primarily used to prevent some kind of a careless mistake by creating a table or altering. Creating is not a problem. I'm not saying that's not a problem. I mean, you can definitely drop the table. But if you are, let's say you are trying to drop a table from you actually execute a drop statement. Your intention was to execute against your development environment, but you actually execute against your production database. That's a big issue, right? So I mean, those kind of scenarios can be easily prevented by creating a DDL trigger for that particular database.
Okay, thanks.
Now, if I want to create, let's say this particular instance consists of 20, 30 databases. And instead of creating this kind of DDL trigger for individual database, another thing you can do is that you can create at the instance level. So if you create this same DDL trigger, if I create at the instance level, that is going to be automatically applicable to all the databases in that particular instance. So I'm going to quickly create a database here. Okay. Yeah, the point and click method also, it is going to give you the same thing, because the point and click method, eventually that whatever that the point and click method you use, that need to be converted into a create table statement, and that create table statement get executed. No matter, I mean, even if you look at here, I am creating a database here using the point and click method, but this is more like an interface, right? So once you click OK, whatever the value you provided here, that need to be converted into a create table statement and get executed, because that SQL is the only language SQL engine understand. So when SQL engine execute that create table statement or create database statement, and then if there is a DDL trigger, definitely it is going to generate an error. All right. So I'm going to quickly create an HRDB here. All right. So if I go and create this table, the table which I'm trying to create, it definitely not going to work on my Adventure Work database. But if I go and create it on HRDB, it will go through, because there's no that particular trigger is only created in Adventure Work database, not on HRDB database, right? All right. Let me go and delete this table. That table has been dropped from HRDB. Now, how about instead of creating separate, now I have two choices. If I don't want anybody creating a table on these two databases, either I need to create that kind of trigger on Adventure Work database and HRDB database, or the second option is that instead of creating it for a particular database, you can also say on all server. All right. So when you say on all server, that particular trigger, DDL trigger, is going to be created at the instance level. So let's take a look. I'm going to say DDL tr DDL create table instance. Here we go. All right, that trigger has been created at the instance level. Now, because that trigger is created at the instance level, where do I see this trigger? It's not going to be under a particular database, because DDL triggers the database level. It is under database programmability and database trigger folder. But if it is created at the instance level, it is going to be in a, yes?
Oh, security?
No, not under security. You go under server object, server object, and you can see a folder here called as triggers, and this is a trigger I just created. Okay. So far we talked about three locations where, because it's a common question, which are the three objects under which you can create a trigger? Which are the three objects where we created the trigger so far from yesterday's class and not yesterday's
Table, database, and instance
yes,
level.
instance level.
Server,
Yes, you can create
database, and table.
Table level. So those are the three different level, the objects under which you can create triggers. I mean, two different type of triggers, but it is still trigger.
You said table instance and what?
Database.
Database. Oh, okay, yeah.
Daniel, because you create a table, that's why we are not, we cannot use our SQL, like our SQL server. The sheet, we cannot open that.
Where you cannot open it, I mean on your machine?
Yeah.
No, that's different. I need to check why it's not working for you. I mean, you stay with me after the class. I can see what's going on.
I think this is for the trigger. That's why I'm.
No, it's not something related. Yes.
To create a trigger in the three-way, I mean, or I don't get the point.
Which point you did not get? The DDL trigger?
No, I mean, I saw in the database and you said in the three parts.
Oh, yeah. You can create triggers. So far, we talked about creating trigger under three type of objects. One is the table, right? The DML triggers are created under a particular table. The DDL trigger you can create under a database level. The first trigger we created, when you say on database, it is going to be created under that particular database. If you say on all server, then that trigger is going to be created under the instance level.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So let's go back here. Now, because I created that trigger under instance level, and then if I execute this create table statement at the HRDB, this time it is going to generate an error, and we got that. Well, even if it say Adventure Work, because that's what the message, error message I coded there, but you can see that even when I create a table at the HRDB, now we are getting an error because we created that trigger at the instance level. Questions, guys?
Daniel, same we can do for drop and alter.
Absolutely.
Same trigger.
Same trigger, yes.
Only
you can,
drop and
yes, change the event for drop table is going. The event for a drop is going to be a drop underscore table. You can, for example, if you want anybody dropping, if you want to prevent anybody dropping a particular object, for example, view. If you don't want anybody to drop the view, then you say drop underscore view. So it's very simple. Which DL action, which is either create, alter, or drop, that's going to be the first part, underscore what type of object we are talking about. It can be a table, view, store procedure, function, any kind of objects can be. So that's the reason why. So there are so many different combinations between the first part and the second part. Even for a table, it is going to be create underscore table, drop underscore table, and alter underscore table.
No, Daniel, I am saying that see in a same trigger we can update like create table and drop table and we can say last one
Absolutely.
alter table.
You can have multiple events, yes. By providing the comma there, you can have same thing with a DML, right?
Yeah.
You can execute the same block of code for insert, update, and delete. Same here. You can have create table, drop table, and alter table, yes.
I like the DDL trigger more than the DML. It's simpler.
Yeah, me too.
Well, because no, yeah, I mean, it's not simpler doesn't mean that it is good. I mean, we all 99% of the time you will be using the DML trigger. DDL is more likely the database best friend, but programmatically, DML is what we always use.
Now, this one is very simple.
Yeah.
So is it clear what is a DDL trigger and what the two locations where DDL trigger can be created?
Yes.
Let me put that old code back here. So this is at the database level. Oh, sorry. At the database level, the second one is instance level.
Daniel?
Yes.
In the database level, we don't have to provide the database name.
Now, when you are executing that create trigger statement, you need to point that to the appropriate database.
Mm-hmm.
Good question, though.
Yeah, but if you were working on another database where you just want to do that, could you put the database name there?
No, the only thing you need to do is that highlight that statement and then point to whichever database under which you want to create that trigger.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid question. I mean, it would have been nice if Microsoft allowed to provide the database name instead of, me making sure that it need to be pointed to the right database. I agree.
If I want to fire this trigger for the two database, I mean for the adventure work and HRDB, then?
Well, then you need to create it separately on those two databases. You cannot say, okay, this particular trigger is going to be executed for database 1, database 2, but it should not be executing for 3 and 4. That doesn't work. If you want to do it for all the database, that's going to be an instance level. If you want to execute for one or bunch of databases in that instance, then for each database, you need to create the trigger.
Okay.
All right, question here from Hari. You are preventing from creating table, which is fine, but do you do this from development database? No, development database, we don't create DDL trigger. DDL trigger is primarily for production databases where accidental change can be prevented. Yes, mature database or production, yes. All right, so that is the DDL trigger. I hope you all understood this. Now, the last one is instead of trigger. Very interesting concept, instead of trigger. Now, before I talk about instead of trigger, I want to do a recap on what is an updatable. What is an updatable view? Anybody remember what is an updatable view? We spent quite good time on that updatable view. Uh-oh. Come on, guys. What is an updatable view? Don't make me cry.
No, we can store a data in updatable view.
We can store data in an updatable view. Is that what he said? No. What is an update?
Views can we use to update the base tables.
Right, that is the one. Right, yes. Normally we write the views to retrieve data from multiple tables without exposing what is the base table is. Now so that's very successful. Now the question is whether that same view can be used to update records in the base table. Answer is it may or may not, because it depends on certain factors and restrictions. A view can be an updatable view. That means instead of executing an update statement against the base table, you can execute update or insert or delete statement against the view, so that corresponding changes will be made there. Now there are so many restrictions whether a view can act as an updatable view. Right, we discussed that, right? If when you are performing an update statement on a view which consists of two base table, as long as those update statements are updating only columns from the same table, that will work. If you are trying to update columns from two different base tables, that's not going to work. Do you remember any of those examples we have covered? Uh-oh. All right, so I mean, if you refer back to the view class, definitely you will remember that, because we spent some time on that, and the class was very interactive. I'm pretty sure that you remember once you see that. All right, so now the question is, if I have a view which is not an updatable view, but I want to make sure that, or is there any way I can make that view an updatable view?
Yeah, you told me that it can be trigger.
It can be an instead of trigger. Okay, so let's talk about, so the workaround is, if we want to convert a non-updatable view into an updatable view, the workaround is go for an instead of trigger. So let's take a look. So I'm going to use a slightly different example here for instead of trigger. Hold on a second. Let me clear out some of my tables. Or how about this? I need some time to get these tables ready. So how about taking a 5 minutes break? When you come back, we can start working on instead of trigger. So now time is 9:53. Come back at 9:58 and we will resume the class. In the meantime, I will have everything ready here. Okay, 5 minutes break. Guys, I'll be back. Okay, I'm going to step out for a minute. All right, so let's continue. So while you are away brewing your cup of coffee, I created, not created, I have two code here. So if you look at this code, I have a product table, okay, which is having product ID, which is a primary key, then description, the price, and I don't need go here. Explain. You will see go a lot, but I will explain what that go shortly. So then I have a second table called as purchase table, which consists of 4 columns. And for purchase table, the purchase ID is going to be the primary key. You see a product ID, which is a foreign key referencing to the product ID column of the product table, the purchase price and purchase date. And purchase date is having a default constraint, which is today's date. Okay. All right. So I'm going to create these two tables here. Oh, we need to do, we have that trigger in place, right? So we need to get rid of that trigger. Then only it is going to let me create the table. So here we go. I can disable that. Okay, instead of deleting it, I can disable it. And so this one is also having a DDL trigger. So disable that. So both cases are disabled. Now let's go and create a table here. So, all right, this time it did go through. Then create the second table. That's also done. So we created two tables here for showing an example for instead of trigger. Now the next step is I'm going to, if I want to display values, first of all I need to insert records into this table. So let's do that first. So I'm going to insert a couple of records into this table. Nothing fancy. It's a pretty simple insert statement. Records are inserted. Now let's do a select statement here. Select star products and select star from purchase table. Let's take a look. Comparing to all other adventure work tables we have seen before, this is pretty simple. So if you look at this, look at records in or information stored in these two tables, you can see I am selling a couple of products here. 7 products I am selling in the product ID, the description and the listing price is here. And my purchase table consists of the purchase ID and which product is being purchased, what is the purchase price, purchase date, all this information is here. So my first requirement is I want to create a view which is going to show all the products which is being sold along with the description, the purchase price, and other information, etc. So I want to do an inner join between those two, and then that inner join statement need to be included or encapsulated inside a view. Okay, all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly create a view. It's a very simple view which consists of a simple inner join. So I'm performing an inner join between products and inner join products and purchase table. It is going to show me all the products. All right, and let me go and create this view. All right, so there's already an object. Maybe because of the previous batch. So let me quickly go and drop that table, that view. Hold on a second. VW. Drop it. Right, so let me go and recreate this view. The view has been created. Now let's see what information that view is going to give us. Do a select statement. Select star from. Okay, so it's going to display the product ID, the description, the product price, the purchase price, and the purchase date. This information is right here. All right. So we have a platform here for testing the instead of trigger. Now, my first question is this view an updatable view? Can I insert a record into this view? What do you guys think?
I don't think so because of the join statement.
Anybody else is having any different opinion? Can I use this? Can I perform an insert operation to the both base table through the view?
You can insert it. Base table is changed. Both the.
Well, you cannot perform if you are performing an insert statement. Well, that view can only have one base table. That's that is what I mentioned when we talk about the update view, right? If you want a view to be an updatable view with respect to an insert, that view should only contain one base table. So because this view is having more than one base table, this is not an updatable view. I mean, we can certainly try inserting a record into this view. So let's do that. Insert into so and so, and provide the value. So the value, the product ID, I'm going to say product ID is 8, and my test product price. Well, here again it doesn't work because you are okay. I can certainly try. I mean, the product ID is going to be this one. I'm going to say product price is listing price is $78, and selling price is going to be $75, and the 10/9 to 2016. Okay.
You have to convert the date.
Why do I need to convert it?
Because it should be a same order. Here it is 101 and here it is 103. The date style.
Oh, no. I mean, it doesn't matter the order in the style, the format of the date you are providing. So you can pretty much provide any kind of SQL engine will automatically convert that. I mean, by default, it is going to be so. It also depends on what is your collation is. So by the default collation is Latin CP. Let me show you what is the default collation. Right click on the database, go to properties, go to options. All right. So the collation option here indicates what is going to be the default date format. There are a lot of other default formats, so that depends on the collation. So the CP1 CIAS, the CI means case insensitive and AS means American standard. So the default setting, everything is going to be the North American base. So you can provide your date format in the North American format, which is going to be month/day/year, and then but when you retrieved it, when the SQL engine retrieve it, it is going to be in a different order. But if you want when during the selecting process when you're trying to retrieve data from the database, that time if you want to display it in a different way, that is when you use the convert function, not when you are trying to insert the record.
Okay.
All right, so let's go and insert this record here. Let's see what SQL engine is going to tell us. All right.
Values insert into, then
yes
before bracket.
Yes, values. Always a second pair of okay. So if you look at this, it clearly says that hey, this is not an updatable view because it is going to modify multiple base tables, right? All right. So now what is the workaround? We need to use an instead of trigger for that. Now talking about instead of trigger is, I mean, people always think that instead of trigger can only be created for a view. That is not true. instead of trigger can be created for a regular table as well. Okay, I will explain when you want a instead of trigger for a regular table. But for now, if somebody asks you how many type of tables, how many type of what are the two different type of trigger can be created on a table, what is going to be the answer? What are the two type of triggers can be created on a table?
After or inside.
After and
DML.
no, on a table, on a
Instead.
single table. It's going to be on a single table. You can create two type of triggers. One is the after trigger, and second
After
one is
trigger and before trigger.
instead of trigger. Yes. And can you create an after trigger for a view? Answer is no. After trigger, the only type of view can be, so only type of trigger can be created for a view is instead of trigger. Okay, always keep that in mind. All right, so let's talk about
After and second one is?
for a table. That's going to be after and instead of trigger.
Okay. Right now we are using the instead of.
Yes, right now we are creating an instead of trigger for the view, but the same instead of trigger can be created for a table as well.
Why we don't use the after one?
The after is not supported for the view. The only thing supported, only trigger supported for a view is instead of trigger.
Okay.
All right. So this statement, insert statement, is not going to work. So I'm going to create. So my intention is that when you're using an instead of, what actually you're telling the SQL engine is, hey, instead of performing an actual insert, do something else. If I say instead of update, I'm telling the SQL engine, hey, instead of updating the record in that view, do something else. That do something else need to be coded in the body of the trigger. So, I mean, it is very simple. When you say instead of followed by whatever keyword you use, you can say instead of insert, instead of update, or instead of delete. So you're telling the SQL engine, if somebody try to insert a record, instead of doing that, do whatever I have in my body of that particular trigger. So let's see an example. So here, what I want is that I want to create an instead of insert trigger. So if somebody try to insert a record into VW underscore product purchase, I don't want the SQL engine to go and try inserting that record into this particular view. Instead of that, I want to perform whatever I have listed in that instead of insert trigger. So here you go. Create trigger, and then the name of the trigger. Let me copy it from here. And then normally when you create a regular after trigger, you will say after the trigger name, you will say on followed by whichever table. So here you can say on followed by a particular table or a view. Okay. In this case, I'm going to use a view. So this trigger is going to be created under a view, and the only type of trigger can be created under the view is instead of, right? So you say normally in the case of a DML trigger, we will say after insert, after insert, delete, or update. But in the case of a DL trigger, it is going to be for create underscore table, drop underscore table, kind of thing. But in the case of an instead of trigger, you will say instead of update. You can say instead of update, instead of delete, or instead of insert as well. So in this case, we are performing, we are creating a instead of insert trigger. Instead of performing an actual insert, we need to do something else. So that something else is what going to be in the body of the trigger. Are you with me so far?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So if somebody try to insert a record into that particular view, the first thing we need to do is that we need to capture those values. I mean, these values are valid values, right? These values are valid values. So I want to get this value inside my trigger. So if I want to get the values of that record inside my trigger, which magic tables I need to use?
Insert date.
Insert. We need to query the inserter table so that inside the trigger I can see what these values are. Okay. All right. So let's take a look. So, well, first of all, we make a decision when you are trying to insert. If somebody try to insert a record into the VW underscore product purchase, well, that is primarily for inserting a record into product table. So if I want to insert a record into now, because this particular view has two base tables, so you need to make that decision. If somebody try to insert a record, to which table that is going to be. So is it going to be in the product table or it is going to be in the purchasing table? So I decided that it is going to be in the purchasing table. Okay, I'm going, every time when somebody try to insert a record into VW product purchase, well, I'm going to insert that into the purchase table. All right, so here we go. So if you look at this, hold on a second. So if I want to insert a record into the purchase table, I need purchase ID, right? The product ID, the purchase price, and the purchase date. Now the purchase ID, I can get it from, not the purchase ID, the product ID, I can get it from the first parameter is going to be, the first value is going to be the product ID, right?
Yeah. Which
Yes.
you can get from either.
The first
Yes,
one.
product ID.
Yes, the product ID is going to be. Now, this is the name of the product. This is the
Yes.
listing price, and this is a purchase price, and this is a purchase date, right? So, all right. We declare a couple of values here, sort of variables here. Declare. I'm going to say prod ID integer. So that's good for capturing that. And then I want to display, I want to capture that product name. Declare the third one is the listing price, right?
Yes.
What was the data type of
Price, it wasn't listing price. So
money? What did you say?
I thought it was just price. We didn't call it listing price. I thought we just said.
Yeah, price or list doesn't matter how you want to call that.
Okay.
Okay, it's going to be money. Then declare
Purchase ID.
Purchase price.
money. What else? Purchase date, right? Declare.
Yes.
All right, so declare a couple of variables here. Now we need to get these variables values. So
Daniel, what about purchase ID?
purchase ID, are we no, purchase ID, unfortunately we cannot give a purchase ID. Purchase ID we need to calculate on the fly, because when somebody try to insert a record, he only thing he can provide is the product ID, the product name, etc., etc. Purchase ID is something we need to specify, we need to declare, we need to identify what is going to be a new purchase ID on the fly. We are going to see that. Purchase ID is not part of that the record you are trying to insert.
Yeah, okay. So we are declaring only that variable who is in inserted table, right?
Right. Yes, because that is what going to be what we are provide. Because when I'm calling the insert statement against that VW product purchase, I'm only going to provide values for whatever column in that particular view. So these are the various the view columns, and then I'm only providing values for only for those columns.
Okay.
So only these values are going to be there in the inserted object. What you said is right. Inserted, And let's do equals product ID, comma, product name.
That one is a description.
Description.
Description. All right.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Doesn't matter. We will say description. Here we go. Thank you. Put a square bracket around it. And price is listing price. What was the?
It's price only.
Price.
It's price.
Price.
All right. It's price.
We are putting the square bracket around the description because it's a function, right?
It is a reserved word. It's a keyword, so that's the reason. So if you look at anything with a blue color, that's a keyword, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to use a reserved word which is actually part of actually a object name, then you need to put a square bracket around it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why this price is yelling at me? Oh, it's called as product price. That's what. And what else? Purchase price equals purchase price, and the last one is purchase date. Purchase date. So we got all these values here, right? Now our intention is that we need to insert this record into which table? We need to insert that record into the purchase table, right? Okay, so if I want to insert record into purchase table, well, we have, which are the values we have? Well, in order to insert a record into the purchase table, you need 4 values, right? We have so many different values. Do we have all the values needed to insert a record into the purchase table? We have the product ID, the product name, price, and purchase date. So we have the product ID, the purchase price, and the purchase date. All the values we need to insert into the product table, the purchase table is there except the purchase ID. Right? Everybody agree?
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we need to calculate the purchase ID. So we can make the best judgment that if this purchase ID's identity column turned on, well, we wouldn't worry about it because then SQL engine will automatically provide that value. Because it is not, because the identity property of that column is not turned on, well, it is our responsibility to provide a value. Now, the easiest way we can do this is, if I want to get the latest purchase ID, how do we do that? If I want to quickly get the latest purchase ID,
Select
Error variable.
max.
hold on a second, I'm going to declare
X.
variable. It's going to be an integer. All right. So if I want to quickly get the latest purchase ID, it is going to be max of.
Purchase ID.
Yes. All right. Hold on a second, guys. So all right, here we go. Select max of from purchase.
Purchase.
All right, so this is going to give me the current purchase ID. Now I want to assign that to this particular variable. Good.
Shouldn't that statement come before the from statement?
Before the from, doesn't matter. We can either do here, or if you want to put that before that select statement, doesn't matter.
Okay.
All right. So now, do you think we have all the values needed?
Yes.
All right. So then you write, say, insert into, and my table name is purchases. and you need to provide the values. It's going to be purchase ID. The first column is going to be purchase ID. Second column is going to be product ID. Third column is going to be purchase price. And the last column is going to be the purchase date. All right. Close it. Now we need to give the values. All right. So here you go. Product ID. Purchase price. Purchase date.
You have write the first purchase date. Okay, fine. That's right. Line number 125 is a semicolon. You have to remove that.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Any question on these statements? All right. So what
we have only four values in the purchase table, and we are passing the 6 variables here. How it will be inserted?
6 variable 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. No, we are only passing 4 values here, right?
Yes, but what we are doing in the select, in the declared part, we have declared the 6 variables, right?
Yeah, I mean when you
are select statement also, we are passing the 5 parameters.
So when you're performing an insert, you might be providing like 50 different values, but what I'm telling this, when you are creating this insert trigger, I'm telling the SQL engine, if somebody try to insert a record through this view, don't execute that. Okay, execute whatever listed in the instead of insert trigger for that view. So what is the logic I have in my instead of insert trigger? In my instead of insert trigger, I only want to insert a record into purchase table. So in my inserted object, there is going to be 50 different columns. I don't care. I only care about whether I am going to get all the column values needed to insert a record into the purchase table. So the number of columns in the inserter need not have to be same as the number of columns we are trying to insert, number of columns in that table where we are trying to insert the record.
It doesn't matter, right?
It doesn't matter. The only thing we are going to get is you will have unnecessarily information get passed into that inserted, but we just capture it. Well, based on your comment, we don't need to even capture this description. We can take it out because we are not using it, right?
Yes.
We are not using it. So, I mean, if you want, you can take it out. You don't really need it. All right. So, can I go and create this trigger?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Here you go. All right. The trigger is created. So, let's take a look where exactly it is created, because we created this trigger for that view. So, this is the view, right? So, expand it. You can see a trigger folder here. Expand. You see the trigger which we just created. Okay. Now, what we are going to do is we are going to insert a record into that.
Daniel?
Yes.
Is it instead of trigger, is it optional? I mean, when we see the instead, it says like the previous we were created in DDL and DDML, yes?
Yes.
So this is a different type of method where is it optional? So
it is
that
optional.
means it's optional.
Yes, that's right. So where is my insert? Okay, this is an insert statement we executed before, right? Okay, let's copy that and put it here. try to execute it. Oh, do you know what the issue is? Anyone?
Product
Primary
ID.
key, because
Primary.
we got the latest purchase ID, but we forgot to add 1 to that, right? So we need to say +1 here. Okay. All right. Let me alter this. All right. So let's go back here. Do we have a product number 8? I forgot to check that. Hold on a second. Do we have anybody check whether we have a product?
No, we don't have.
You don't? Oh, so that's a problem. So we need to, we cannot use the product 7. We need to go for product 7. All right. So product 7 is Xbox. All right. So it did go through fine, right? So let's take a look what kind of record it actually inserted. This time not give an error. All right. So you can see there is a 4th record get inserted here with the product ID 7 and 75 is the selling the purchase price, and you can see the today's date there. So what we did is that our non-updatable view, we still are using that view for insert, but with the help of the instead of insert trigger, we are performing some other actions behind the scene, right?
Daniel,
Yes.
you can insert a record just with one statement. So why do I have to use this trigger anyway?
Because we don't want to expose the base table. Because if let's say I have a report developer and I ask him, okay, if you want to get the product and the purchase information, you can use the trigger. So this particular view. But later he want to make some changes to my the purchase price, and still I don't want to expose the base table. So I create this instead of trigger, and then I tell him that, hey, if you want to make some changes, or if you want to insert a record into that purchase information, you still use the trigger. So still use the view. So the advantage you still get without exposing, advantage you are going to get is we are not exposing the base table. That's one of the biggest advantage of using the view, right? Encapsulation, data encapsulation, or hiding the source data.
So like when you have to insert a data in a table, so you always do this?
Well, if you don't want to expose the base table, well, that is the view is what we always use.
So the basically like just the insert statement insert into base is not that useful then.
Which one is not useful?
Like,
I'm sorry.
Like writing a single insert statement, you never do this then.
Well, if you're writing a simple insert statement directly in the table, yeah, I mean, we are not going to do this. This is going to come into play only if you are in a situation where you don't want to expose your base tables. Okay, but still you want that guy to insert a record into the table, then you create a view, and then behind for that view you create it instead of insert or update or delete. So for that third party person, he's still performing the insert, but the good news is he's not really seeing to which table he's inserting it. And then when he execute that select statement on that view, he is going to see that record, right? So after inserting that record, if I go and execute that view, he's still going to see that record he just inserted. There's my microphone, a lot of noise. So he can see. So for him, the insert is performed by that view, and the select is also performed by that view, so that he's not even aware about to which base table the record is inserted and from which base table the record is pulled for his select statement. Clear?
Okay, I understand that.
It's heavily used. I mean, especially if you are working on a database where there are a lot of consultants want to access data and modify data, and you don't want them to have direct access to those tables, or you want to hide those tables, the view is extensively used along with instead of triggers.
Daniel, in
I
a
think that's this is to prevent like the outside user to prevent from directly accessing the table.
Absolutely, yes. Accessing. I mean, it's not about accessing the table.
I mean, yeah.
Data encapsulation, all those comes into play here. Yes. What's the other question?
Daniel, in our insert statement, we are just passing in a description my text product, right? And here we are seeing Xbox.
Well, because that my test product, we need to provide that because that is one of the column in that view. Okay, so but I'm providing that value, but if you look at that instead of trigger, I'm not using it. I'm capturing that. I'm capturing two values which I'm not going to use, which is the description and the product price. And the product price also I'm not using it. So literally speaking, I don't really need to capture these two values. I mean, I can just comment this out because I don't need in order to insert a record into that purchase table, I don't need these two values.
That means the Xbox and 400 is like a random value, we can say. Yeah.
No. The product ID. The product ID is what the most important thing. The for product, which is the product ID I'm passing in. Don't worry about. So this is actually 7. Okay. So when I say 7, I mean, it doesn't matter what what the description I am saying there, because the product 7 description is already there in the table, right?
Yes.
So that is what it is going to get. So if you look at, after inserting that record, if you look at the purchase table, the purchase table doesn't have any description, right?
Yes.
It's only having the product ID. So what is going to be the description for the product ID 7? That is listed in the product table, and that product ID 7 description is Xbox. So whatever value I am providing here for the description in my insert statement is useless. But can I ignore that? Well, if I ignore it, it is going to generate an error because the description is a column in that view. So even if I'm not using it, I need to still provide it because it's part of the view.
But you can pass an empty string, right? Not
you can pass an empty string, yes. Now, what if I pass a value, product ID 8? Okay, let's see another example here where we can really use this description and the listing price. So the view the instead of view which I just created, I am only inserting record to one single table, right? I'm inserting record to one single table. My next question is it possible to create a trigger instead of insert trigger which can insert record to multiple tables?
Yes.
You can. It's very easy. So only thing you need to do is that I'm going to copy this, okay? Let me copy this. So my requirement is that when same thing, I'm going to perform an alter. So if I insert a value here, all right. If I provide a value here, what's going to be the result?
At that time, it's like giving an error.
What kind of error you are expecting?
Foreign key.
Foreign key, primary key relationship error, right? Because you are trying to insert a value into the purchase table where the product ID value doesn't have a corresponding value in the product table, because we don't have a product ID called as 8 in the product table. So I have two choices. I can modify the trigger in such a way that if somebody try to pass a product ID value which doesn't exist in the product table, system will either automatically generate that foreign key primary key relationship error, or Another thing I can do is that before I insert that record in the purchase table, I can insert a record into the product table based on the product name and the product listing price. If I want to insert a record into the product table, which information I needed. So let's take a look. If I want to insert a record into the product table, I only need three information, right? The product ID, the description, which is already there, and the listing price is also there. So it just so I have to, if I insert a record into that view with an invalid product ID, I have two choices. Either I will leave it to the SQL engine to generate that error, or I can create a table. I can create a record into the product table before I execute this insert statement. What do you guys think? Is it
Yeah.
possible? Yes.
Yeah.
So let's do that. So all the information needed is right here. So it's just a matter of an insert statement and a if. So for now, I need this description and the product price back, because that is the value which I want to use to insert record into the product table. All right, so the first thing first. So check if the product exists in product table. So how do I check that? What statement I need to use to check whether that particular product already exists in the product table?
Exists.
Okay, all right. If exists, select star from
Product.
Is it product or products? I forgot. Products.
Done.
All right, products. Where product ID equals, right. Well, it is not exist. It's not exist, because if it doesn't exist, we need to insert a record. So we need to negate that by if not exist. And here we need to insert a record. Products. Product ID, description, and price. Values. All right, so the values are right here. The product ID and the description is going to be product name, and the price. All right. Do you think this will serve our purpose?
I hope so.
Insert so that is the second one. That is the second insert statement, right? All right. All right, so do an alter here. Statement did go through fine. Now here you go. So go here, and I'm performing this product ID 8, which doesn't exist, and the product name is my test product. All right. This time it did not generate any error. Now let's take a look at both tables here. Now you can see a third record, a eighth record inserted here in the product table. Product ID 8, my test product is a description, product price is 78, and then you can also see a fifth record inserted in the purchase with the product ID 8 and the purchase price is 75, listing is 78, purchase is 75, and the today's date. What do you guys think?
Daniel, it says 3 rows affected. So we can see only 2 rows.
Okay, yeah, I understand what you're saying. Okay, so it's displayed in the message tab. It says that the 3 records get inserted. Okay, so that reason is because when you are inserting a record into the view, well, even if it is going to call those instead of trigger, there is a section where it is going to insert those values into the inserted object, right? So values get inserted in the inserted object, that is going to be 1. Then in the instead of trigger, we are inserting record into the product table, that is going to be 2. Then we are inserting record into the purchase table, that is going to be 3. That's why. Okay. So what do you think about instead of trigger? So instead of trigger, with the view, there's only trigger available, and this is primarily used to convert a non-updatable view into an updatable view. This is more like a workaround. Don't think that it is only applicable to an insert, because certain cases you want to insert. Let's say I'm performing an update statement. Now, update statement, the base table, if you have more than one base table, well, what is the restriction? If you have more than one base table, and if you're performing an update on that view, what is the restriction? Anybody remember? That updates should only modify or update columns from one single table, right? Yes. But if you are in a situation where instead of executing multiple update statement for individual columns in each of those base table, I can perform, if you want to execute an update statement against that view which consists of multiple columns coming from multiple base table, definitely it is not going to work. So you can create a instead of update trigger for that, right? So that is the instead of trigger, how instead of trigger is going to be used with respect to a view. Now think about instead of trigger used with respect to a table. Can anybody tell me in what scenario we use instead of trigger for a table? Anyone? What would be an ideal scenario where instead of trigger can be used for a table?
When view is updatable.
No. Let's say I have a table, and then I'm going to I created a instead of insert trigger for that table. I have a table ABC, and then I created a instead of insert trigger for that particular table, and then I go and insert a record into that table. Do you think that record is going to be inserted to that table?
Yes, because we created it instead of.
No, I did not specify what you are going to do inside that instead of. So let's take a look. I mean, it's going to be better to explain, show you an example then. All right. So I can use the same thing. What I'm going to do is that I'm going to create a instead of insert trigger for the product table. Okay, let's do that. This is the instead of trigger for a table. Let me modify the other one. It is instead of trigger for a view. My keyboard. I don't want to do anything. I just want to print something. I'm here in instead of insert. Okay. All right. So, all right, the trigger is created. Now let me go and insert a record into that table. Let's do it here. And let's go for a product number 9 and LCD TV. All right, I'm happily trying to insert a record into this particular table. Let's see what happens. What does it say? Does it insert the record? Let's take a look. I mean, whether it's when you see this message, right? I am here in insert trigger. Now the question is whether it actually inserted a record into that table. Answer is no. So what does it do? When you try to perform that insert statement on that product, the first thing it is going to check is if you're trying to insert a record into the table, the first thing it is going to check is whether there is any instead of insert trigger access. That's the first thing it is going to check. If it is going to redirect that traffic to kind of redirecting traffic to that particular view. So whatever you have in that body of trigger, that is what going to be executed instead of actually performing an insert into that products table. Now the ideal situation where the instead of trigger we use with a table is that this is going to be like a before trigger, because all the DML triggers are after trigger, right? After insert, after delete, after after insert, update, or delete. But it's a common interview question: is there any before trigger available? Well, there is no before trigger, but if you really want to perform some kind of a validation before a record get inserted, what you are going to do? You will create an instead of trigger. Now inside the trigger, what you are going to do is, if you want to do some validation and if that validation is successful, you still want to insert a record into that table. So what you will do? You will do all the validation. If the validation is successful, you will have an insert statement inside the trigger so that the record is going to be inserted into the actual table. So the instead of trigger, for a table, most of the time we use it as a concept of or create an illusion of before trigger. Clear? Very rarely we do it, but if sometimes in the interview they will ask if you want to create some kind of a validation before you insert into a table, and those validations cannot be done through a regular constraint, what would be your option? And what is your option? Create an instead of trigger for that table. Inside that trigger, you write all the validation you want, and then if validations are successful, insert the record into the table. If the validation is not successful, then you can generate an error or whatever way you want to handle that. Okay, clear on instead of trigger? Different ways it can be used.
Yes.
Okay, it's a very good discussion on trigger. All right, so that is all for tonight. Tomorrow we are going to start with start procedure. So you are going to get the labs for this, and start procedure is because we covered the transactions and the racer and all the other things, so that is the base for talking about the start procedures. You're welcome, Yusuf.
Hey, Daniel.
Yes, sorry. Yes. Sorry, just a second. You want to make an announcement? Okay, so guys, the class is over. If you have any questions, please stay back. Otherwise, we will meet tomorrow at 9 p.m. Okay? All right. Have a good night.